She growled behind him, but her growl wasn't rage, it was mourning. Declan turned toward her, flashlight dipping briefly. Her eyes met his, and in them was the truth he hadn't dared guess. Runa hadn't always been wild. She'd belonged to someone. Someone who'd disappeared. Someone the town never found and she had followed. Down into the earth, into whatever lay beneath. This wasn't her first time here. She had escaped the shape, took another step, and the air thickened with pressure. The children whimpered, shrinking behind Runa's body. Declan fired. One shot, direct controlled. Report cracked through the chamber like thunder. The shape didn't fall. The bullet hit. He saw it hit, but it made no sound. No blood. The thing only tilted its head, as if curious. Then the green light surged outward in a wave of heat and nausea, pushing Declan back a step. You bring pain into a place that was peace, it said, disappointed. You think I hunted, but you do not ask why they ran to me. Because they were afraid, Declan said, choking on the heat. No, it replied, the words slow, deliberate, because they were forgotten. The ground trembled. A hum began, low and harmonic, like metal singing. Declan reached for the children. We're leaving, he said, pulling them close, but the tunnel behind them had changed, collapsed. No light. No exit. Just stone. He turned to Runa. She was already moving toward a second passage, one Declan hadn't noticed before, narrow, near invisible in the gloom. She stopped, looked back, then disappeared inside. Declan didn't hesitate. He took the children in his arms and followed. Behind them, the voice echoed once more. You fed her, so she brought you truth, but you weren't ready to carry it. Then silence. Real, total silence. The tunnel wound upward. The air grew cleaner. And just when Declan thought he'd have to turn back daylight, they spilled into the woods like survivors clawing free from a grave. Rain was falling again, soft and cold against their skin. Declan collapsed to his knees, holding both children. Close as they sobbed into his shoulders, Runa stood, nearby, staring back toward the entrance, not proud, not triumphant, just watching, as if this had been her duty. As if the truth she carried had been passed on, and for the first time, Declan understood. She hadn't saved Emma by accident. She had been trying to warn him all along because someone or something had taken more than children. It had taken memory. And now, Declan carried what it had tried to bury. But what haunted him most wasn't the shape. Underground, it was the final thing the child had whispered as they emerged into the light. That thing. It didn't want me, it wanted her. Declan sat on the edge of his porch as the last light drained from the sky. The children were safe now, warm, fed, and sleeping under careful watch at the regional hospital. Their stories would be put by therapists, catalogued by detectives, and quietly reshaped into something the public could bear to hear. There would be no official mention of what truly lived beneath the woods. No one would dare name it. The shaft had been sealed that same night, by morning covered in cement, unmarked. The chief didn't ask questions. The higher-ups didn't want answers. The official report called it an abandoned trafficker's hideout, a miraculous rescue, thanks to a stray and a lucky lead. They were already crafting a commendation. Declan hadn't signed the report. The collar sat in his palm now, the cracked leather still damp from the shaft. Runa was gone again. She hadn't followed him out of the forest that night, just stood in the tree line, rain glinting from her fur like metal, watching them disappear into the world above. Declan had waited. He'd return to the clearing the next day, then again the day after. Left food called her name. Nothing. The wind there no longer carried scent. The trees no longer leaned. The silence had returned to its old familiar depth, the kind that buried things instead of revealing them. But in his bones, he knew she was still alive. He reached down and opened the metal case beside him. Inside lay the two objects he hadn't turned in, the metal shard from the baby blanket, and the old collar. Now that the dirt had been cleaned away, he could see the initials burned into the leather. Canine Runa. Search and Rescue, North Point Division. She had belonged to someone, a working dog, a partner. A record request confirmed what he suspected. Her handler had gone missing 5 years ago during a flood zone search near the same stretch of forest. Declared lost. No body recovered. The dog had been presumed dead, swept away in the current, but she hadn't died. She had kept searching, kept waiting, until someone listened. Declan exhaled slowly and stared out across the lawn. The rain had left everything cleaner than usual, the air cold and sharp with autumn. Across the street, the neighbor's porch light flicked on. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Not her, a different pitch. Lighter still, his breath hitched. For half a second, he thought about the moment in the shaft, when the thing, whatever it had been, had stepped forward and held the collar in those wrong-shaped hands. It hadn't spoken with hate, it had spoken with possession, with entitlement. It wanted her, and it had waited for someone foolish or desperate enough to lead her back. Declan didn't know how she had escaped before. He didn't want to imagine what she'd endured beneath that earth, how long she had wandered, but she had brought back a child instead of staying free, had returned to the same thing that hunted her, because she remembered. He rose slowly, tucked the collar into the case, and locked it shut. That night, he dreamed of her. Not the nightmare kind, not the antlers, or the twisted limbs, or the echoing voice. Just her, standing on a hillside overlooking town, tail still, ears flicked to the breeze, waiting. The light was golden, her coat clean, and for the first time, her eyes didn't look wounded. They looked ready. The next morning a letter arrived in his mailbox, no return address, no stamp, just a small folded note, tucked neatly in a plastic sleeve with a pressed dog tag inside. The tag read, "She never stopped searching. Maybe now, neither should you." There were no fingerprints. No one ever came to claim the children. DNA records came back blank. Their names, Emma and Jonah, seemed given, not remembered. The doctors said trauma did strange things, that the mind rewrites what it can't bear to recall. Declan didn't press. He visited them often, brought them books, taught them how to use crayons again. Emma liked to draw trees. Jonah, dogs. Always the same dog, brown, tall, with torn ears and a long scar down the cheek. Always standing between them and something dark. Sometimes, when Declan walked the long trail behind his house, he thought he saw her in the trees. Not close, not clear. Just a flash of movement. A shape slipping between shadows, watching, never running. He didn't call out anymore. He just nodded and walked on. By spring he had resigned from the department quietly. No press release, no retirement send-off. The badge stayed in the drawer beneath the collar, where both would be safe. He kept the radio though, just in case. Started working with search and rescue again, civilian branch. Missing hikers, lost kids, runaways. The kind of cases others gave up on. The kind that needed a little more belief than policy allowed. Everywhere he went, people asked about her. Is she real? Was it true? Do dogs really remember like that? He always said the same thing, soft and plain. Some of them never forget, they just wait for someone who does. One afternoon, months later, he stood at the edge of the same shaft, now sealed and grown over. Grass had returned, the air was clean, but something underneath was still watching. He bent down and placed the case, the collar, the tag, the shard into the earth, covered it gently, not to bury it, not to forget, but to honor what survived. And when he looked up again, far across the clearing, just for a moment, he saw her standing there, not wild, not stray, just home. And for the first time, he smiled. You feed that mutt again, and it's your badge next. The door slammed before Officer Declan Roach could answer. The bitter echo of the chief's warning rolled through the dim hallway of the precinct like a shot fired too close. Outside, the wind pushed ash-colored clouds low across the sky, and the late November chill hung like breath held too long. Declan exhaled into his gloves, but the cold wouldn't leave him, not since he saw those eyes. He stepped out the back door with a styrofoam tray in hand, half his lunch untouched, but it wasn't for him. The alley behind the station smelled of oil and frostbitten leaves, but it was empty now. No fur, no limping steps, no low growl, soft as gravel under boots, just the whistle of wind and the hush of waiting. He paused, then knelt and set the tray. Down anyway, she'll come, he muttered, almost to convince himself. The dog had no name, not officially, but in his mind, she was Runa, scarred muzzle, torn ear, one hind leg stiff, dragging slightly with each step. She didn't bark, didn't flinch, just stared, eyes like rusted copper, always watching, as if she remembered something no one else wanted to. The first time she came, 2 nights ago, she hadn't eaten right away, just circled the tray twice, sniffed him once, and vanished like steam in the dark. Last night, she'd eaten beside him in silence. This morning, she was gone again. Declan stood, feeling ridiculous. 39 years old, 10 years in the force, and here he was feeding ghosts behind a police station. The chief said the dog was a problem, said she was wild, possibly dangerous, said animal control had tried to catch her twice and failed. And maybe that was all true. But Declan had seen her ribs under the matted fur, seen the way her nose trembled at the sound of sirens. She wasn't dangerous, she was surviving. That night the storm came early. Rain slashed sideways across rooftops, and the town of Elbridge shut its windows tight. Somewhere out near the hills, thunder rolled like the rattle of an empty train car. Declan sat on the edge of his bed, listening, half-dressed in uniform, one boot on. He should have been asleep. But the thought wouldn't leave him, the way Ruth had looked back over her shoulder last night before disappearing. Not cautious, not fearful, like she wanted him to follow. He didn't. Now the wind howled through the gutters. Just before dawn, the call came through. Dispatch to all units, we've got a disturbance at the community church. Front doors open, possibly vandalized. Alarm triggered. Requesting nearest unit for visual inspection. Declan's hand went to the radio before he even realized. Unit 12 responding. I'm 2 minutes out. The church stood pale and hollow against the pre-dawn blue, its steeple barely visible through mist and sleet. The door was wide open, rocking on its hinges like something had forced its way in or out. Declan drew his flashlight and stepped. Inside. At first, nothing. Just pews, rain tapping the stained glass, the heavy scent of whetstone and old hymnals, then movement. In the aisle. Declan froze. She was there. Are you an soaked, silent, head low and dragging something behind her as breath caught. Not a limb, not prey. It was fabric, pink and blue, soaked through and bundled in her jaw like a sacred offering, a blanket dot, and in its small fingers, a child. Declan's knees hit the floor before he even felt them drop. The girl wasn't crying. She was pale, her lips faintly blue, but her chest was moving. Shallow, fast, but alive. And Runa, the wild canine no one could catch, no one could name, sat beside the child and lowered her muzzle to the floor as if to say, "I brought her here. You take it from here." Declan's hands trembled as he called it, in Dot by sunrise. The story had already begun to spread through dispatch radios, hospital waiting rooms, cafe counters and school buses. A stray dog, a missing infant, a stormy night, and a mystery that would unearth more than just where the girl had been, because someone had taken her, and the dog had found her first. But no one could answer the real question. Where had Runa gone that night, and how did she know? The hospital room buzzed with quiet, monitors blinked steady rhythms, and warm air hissed softly from a vent overhead. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a strange stillness, the kind that made everything seem too quiet, too perfect, as if nature was holding its breath. Declan stood in the doorway. UNMOVING. The child, Emma, the nurses were calling her now, lay wrapped in clean linens, her tiny fists tucked beneath her chin like she'd never been outside at all. No official missing person report had matched. No parents had come forward. Just a bundle of silence, delivered through rain, by an animal no one trusted. "Where did you come from?" he whispered, though he wasn't talking to the girl. He hadn't slept. Runa had vanished again, slipping out through the broken church door as the paramedics took over. One second she was sitting beside the child like a soldier keeping watch. The next she was gone into the fog. No collar, no tag, no reason to trust him at all. And yet she had brought him life. By noon, local news vans were already circling like vultures, looking for angles and sound bites. Hero, cop and miracle dog save abandoned baby. But Declan knew better. He hadn't saved anyone. He'd only listened to a feeling, fed astray, and followed her lead. And that scared him more than anything because he couldn't explain it. He stepped back into the hallway as a nurse approached. Her voice was kind but clipped, carrying the fatigue of someone who'd seen too many nights like this. "She's stable. Mild hypothermia. No internal injuries. Honestly, it's a miracle." Declan nodded, grateful but distant. "There was something else," the nurse added, lowering her voice. "They found fibers in the blanket, bits of fur, dirt, and this." She handed him a small evidence bag, sealed tight, inside a metallic shard, curved like a tooth, dulled by rust. "What is it?" he asked. "Don't know, but it was tucked deep in the fabric. Forensics thinks it might be a piece of wire fencing or something older." Declan stared at it, unease curling in his gut. Something about its shape felt wrong, primitive, like it didn't belong in a baby blanket. He left the hospital not long after, heading back to the church. The storm had stripped the building down to its barest sounds, creaking beams, the occasional drip from a cracked stained glass seam, but inside, something lingered, a smell, a presence. He knelt at the exact spot where Runa had laid the child. There were scratches on the floorboards, deep ones, like claws dragged in haste. A trail of faint, muddy prints led toward the vestry, but they stopped cold beside the baptismal font. No door, no open window, just stone and silence. Back at the precinct, the questions were piling up. Why hadn't anyone reported the child missing? Where had she been taken from? And why had Runa, astray with no ties to anyone, risked bringing her back? Declan sat in the locker room long after his shift ended, watching rain start again through the high window. His badge felt heavier than usual, and in his pocket, he kept turning that metal shard between his fingers. He didn't tell anyone, but he'd had a nightmare the night before. Runa had been howling, not barking, howling, and behind her, a shape moved in the trees. Not a man, not an animal, something in between. He shook the thought off. Too many nights, not enough sleep. That's all it was, but something was gnawing at him now, an instinct honed over years of police work, patterns, coincidences that weren't coincidences. He pulled up a map of then a second, then a third, older, faded maps from before the highway came through, back when the town was still edged with farmland and mining claims, and there it was. A path, 5 disappearances over the last 3 years, each one unsolved, each one involving children under the age of 6. None of the cases connected publicly, but Declan noticed something else. All of them had taken place along a stretch of territory now mostly forgotten. Woods, abandoned barns, a few collapsed shafts left over from the copper boom in the early 1900s, and the church, built right at the center of them. Declan's heart beat faster. Not fear, exactly, not yet, but something colder, something like a breath down the neck. He grabbed his coat, barely speaking to anyone as he left the station. An hour later he was back in the hills, where power lines gave way to trees and the roads turned to gravel. He parked where the forest overtook the trail, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped into the dark. The wind was moving strangely here. Not against him, around him, circling. He passed a rusted wire fence, half buried in leaf rot. Beyond it, the outline of a crumbled structure barely visible under ivy and moss, an old watchpost, maybe, or a hunting blind. He didn't notice the smell at first, but then it hit him low and metallic. Not rot, not waste, blood. Something crunched under his boot, a jawbone, not human, not recent. He crouched, raising the flashlight, and froze. There in the dirt, paw prints, deep ones, large, and beside them, smaller, indentions. Boots, children's single quotes boots. He turned slowly, every nerve raw, and then he heard it just beyond the clearing, a low growl, not angry, not warning. Calling. Runa. She was waiting, but she wasn't alone. And this time, she wasn't just trying to show him what had happened. She was trying to stop what was still happening. The growl came again, low, guttural, and layered with something deeper than warning. It vibrated in Declan's chest like a distant drumbeat, primal and steady. He raised his flashlight toward the sound, its beam cutting through branches slick with rain. Runa stood just beyond the rotting fence line, her frame soaked and trembling, her copper eyes fixed not on him but on the darkness behind her. Declan stepped forward slowly. "I'm here," he whispered. Runa didn't move, didn't blink, just let out a soft, breathless whine that didn't match her size or scars. It was a sound of desperation, of pleading, and behind her, movement. Not wind. Not animal. Something else. Declan's fingers found the grip of his sidearm, but he didn't draw, not yet. Instead, he passed through the threshold of the collapsed fence, boots cracking old glass and stone. The woods changed. As he entered, quieter somehow, heavier, as if every tree remembered something it didn't want to. He followed Runa through the brush. He didn't look back. They just moved with slow, purposeful steps through the overgrowth until the earth began to dip beneath them, forming a long, shallow basin. Declan felt the drop before he saw it, a yawning depression, lined with stones and decaying roots. It was man-made, that much was clear. A shaft, long sealed, then forgotten, but now open, and from within, a faint red glow pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Declan froze at the edge. His flashlight flickered, caught by something metallic inside. A narrow ladder descended into shadow, bolted to one wall, its rungs rusted but intact. Fresh footprints led down, human, small. He turned to Runa. She was panting now, her body tense, but still, waiting. As if asking, "Will you follow?" Declan swallowed hard. The earth smelled wrong here, not like rot or decay, but old copper and scorched soil. He clipped his radio to his collar and pressed the mic. "This is Unit 12, he said, voice low. "I'm at the old mining site east of Hollow Creek Road. Found an active shaft, possible connection to missing persons. Requesting backup and forensics. Mark it urgent." A pause, no response. He tried again. Static. The signal was gone. Runa had already begun descending, claws clicking softly on each rung, almost too natural, as if she'd done this before, as if she'd been down there more than once. Declan followed. The air grew thick as he moved lower. Not cold, warm, close, like something breathing against his skin. By the time his boots touched bottom, he could see the source of the glow, a cracked lantern resting on a rock, its bulb pulsing unnaturally red-tinted and low. He raised his flashlight and swept the chamber. At first, it looked empty. Then his beam caught them. Drawings. Hundreds scrawled across the stone walls in chalk, ash, and something darker, childlike, frantic. Stick figures, dogs, eyes, always eyes. Watching surrounding one drawing repeated again and again, a figure with antlers towering over smaller shapes, a mouth too wide, legs bent the wrong way. Declan stepped back. A child's voice echoed faintly through the shaft, muffled and distant. Then another laughter, but not joyful, hollow, forced. Runa moved ahead through a narrow tunnel, branching off the main chamber. Declan followed, heart pounding, light sweeping every corner. The tunnel bent and twisted, descending into deeper earth, until the air changed again, damper now, filled with the smell of rust and mold. Then a door, wooden, bolted newer. Then anything else here and just beyond it. Crying. Declan's breath caught. It wasn't a memory, it was now. He raised his boot and kicked the door once, twice, until the rusted bolt snapped and the door slammed open. The room beyond was barely more than a pit, concrete floor, bare stone walls. And huddled in the far corner, wrapped in a torn blanket, were two children, both alive, both terrified. Runa rushed past him and stopped short of the children, lowering her body to the ground, tail still, ears back. One of the kids, a boy older than 6, reached for her immediately, burying his face in her fur. The other clung to a cracked plastic toy, blinking at the light like she hadn't seen daylight in days. Declan radioed again. Still nothing. He moved toward them slowly, crouching beside Runa. "I'm Officer Roach," he said gently. "You're safe now, I promise." The boy looked up at him, lips trembling. "He's coming back," he whispered. "He said if we screamed, he'd hear us through the roots." Declan's blood turned cold. "Who?" he asked, but the child didn't answer, just stared toward the tunnel. Wide-eyed. A low vibration shuddered through the floor, then another dot, footsteps not fast, not loud, just steady. Approaching. Runa bristled, body rigid. Declan drew his weapon and turned toward the passage. The beam of his flashlight hit nothing, but the air was thick with the scent of burned leaves. And somewhere, behind the rhythm of his own breath, something else breathed deeper, slower, and it wasn't done, yet. The silence became unbearable. Not just the absence of sound, but the pressure it carried, like the earth itself was listening. Declan gripped his sidearm tighter, finger off the trigger but ready, eyes fixed on the blackness of the tunnel ahead. The children were pressed, but against the far wall now, trembling under the weight of something they couldn't explain. Runa hadn't moved. She stood rigid, ears pinned, tail low. Her body turned to shield the children behind her. Then came the scrape, metal on stone, slow, deliberate, and far too confident. Declan stepped forward, flashlight trained ahead. The beam trembled just slightly, in his grasp, not from fear, but from something deeper. Instinct. Every cell in his body knew something was wrong, but his mind refused to label it. He had spent 10 years facing the worst of humanity, and still this felt like something else entirely. The air grew colder, and then the glow appeared. Not a flashlight, not fire. Something sickly and green, moving like mist with weight. It twisted through the tunnel and pooled near the ceiling before slipping away again. Declan's flashlight flickered. He tapped it once and the beam steadied, revealing nothing but dripping stone and shadow. But he knew someone was there. He could feel the eyes on him. Then, softly, impossibly gentle, a voice: "You shouldn't have come." It came from everywhere and nowhere, threaded with static and wet with breath. Declan took another step forward, gun raised. "Show yourself," he called out. "You're not going to hurt anyone else." A pause, then laughter, not a cackle, not a madness. It was worse, familiar. Almost like a teacher, softly amused by a student's mistake. "You think this is about hurting," the voice said. "You still think in your small, human words." Behind him, the girl began to cry. Not from pain, from recognition. Declan turned for just a second, just long enough to see her staring at the tunnel mouth with her hand outstretched, pointing through her sobs. "He's wearing a mask," she whispered, "but it's not his." Declan turned back and finally saw it, just beyond the edge of the light, half hidden in the dripping stone. A shape, not man, not quite beast. Antlers that arced like twisted roots. A face or something shaped like one, featureless. Skin pale as clay, stretched over something far too large underneath. And its hands, too many joints. Too still. It didn't move. It watched. Declan raised his weapon. "Step out now." The thing didn't respond. It simply leaned forward, its weight disturbing the very sound in the air. Dust fell from the stone around it. Water beaded and hissed on the floor where it landed. The green glow pulsed again, this time from beneath its skin. "I took nothing that wasn't already given," it said, voice lower now, more grounded. "They wander. I find I keep them safe." Declan's heart pounded in his ears. "You stole them," he said, keeping the gun steady even as every nerve begged him to run. "I rescued them," the voice replied. Then it stepped forward, only half a stride, enough for the light to catch the edge of its form and reveal what it was carrying. A collar. Old leather, cracked and torn, still stained with dried blood. The tag was missing. Declan felt the breath leave his chest. It was